You're listening to Entrepreneur Encounter, the podcast where soft skills meet real talk for creative business owners who are building with purpose. I'm Dana, a Pinterest marketing strategist and agency owner helping wedding pros and creative entrepreneurs get seen without burning out.
And I'm Sarah, a business and team strategist who helps small teams and podcasters communicate clearly, lead with empathy, and grow sustainably. Together, we're unpacking the messy, meaningful side of entrepreneurship, from boundaries to burnout, leadership to listening, so you can build a business that actually fits your life. Dana, what is the longest you've ever put off having a conversation you knew you needed to have, either with like a client or a team member, and just have been putting it off for way too long?
Probably around like 3 or 4 months. Like, I'm actually going to bring this into just our podcast in itself. I don't like asking for help, as we all know if you listen to this podcast for any length of time. And I put a lot on my plate thinking I can be Wonder Woman, Superwoman, and like really get it all done. But essentially, I'm putting myself on a pedestal and then wonder why I keep failing or falling behind or feeling like I'm falling behind. And so I kept putting off essentially admitting that like what we were doing with this podcast, with having guests on and everything that comes with that, was just too much for me to handle. But I didn't want to talk about it. And I wanted to still find a way to do it all by myself, like keep our lanes separate. But behind the scenes, I kept getting more and more overwhelmed and panicky and anxious about basically anything and everything just because it was boiling over.
Yeah, that is definitely frustrating in itself, keeping everything to yourself and not bringing that up, because again, oftentimes when we ask for help, we're our own worst critic. People that ask for help always say like you're failing or it's you're being weak, so to speak. But if you don't have those conversations, if you don't bring something up, then you're going to be stuck. And I'm glad that we had that conversation, because I'm telling you right now, like I would have never known, and whatever something is going on in your personal or professional life, if something is eating at you, you're only going to make it worse if you keep it all in your head. And then you're just going to keep trucking along and wonder why you're burnt out and overwhelmed.
Yeah. By the time I said something, it definitely came out more emotional than it probably needed to. But by the time we had that conversation, I was so like just not even tired, but exhausted. And to me, there is a difference. Like I was just exhausted and basically, I'm sure you remember, word vomited and cried all about how like just overwhelming life was. And it definitely wasn't my finest moment.
But do you realize that when you have conversations like that, like the conversation that you brought up to me, even though you may think it's not your finest moment, you feel comfortable enough to bring it up, although that it may have felt super uncomfortable at the time.
It was so uncomfortable.
So that's what we're talking about today, having difficult conversations, specifically how to have them before they become impossible to have.
Exactly. So today we're diving deep into conflict resolution as a crucial soft skill. We're talking about how to address problems early, like I should have done, how to have conversations that actually strengthen relationships instead of damaging them, and why avoiding difficult talks usually makes everything so much harder than it needs to be. Because here's the thing, most of us think we're being kind by avoiding difficult conversations. I know I did. I kept telling myself that I didn't want to rock the boat or I didn't want to hurt Sarah's feelings, because I couldn't keep up on my end. And we had really big goals for where we wanted this podcast to go and we were making it work, but I was definitely dropping the ball. So in turn, at least for that little bit, I was making things worse by not saying something, even if it was just worse for me on my end, because I was overwhelmed.
If you're someone who runs a business, manages a team, or works with any type of client, learning how to have these conversations isn't just helpful, it's essential. Because if you would have never came to me, we probably would have been in the same spot. You were overwhelmed and I would have known. But here's the thing too, like when you have conversations, listening to other people's perspectives on what they're going through, and then the other person that's listening, okay, look, what can we do to make this better? And I truly believe that that conversation that we had, we have been doing amazing. It's not as overwhelming. Obviously, some things, I mean, as life, things get overwhelming, things do get complicated. But I think whatever difficult conversation that you're holding back, and if you don't have that, you're going to either be stuck somewhere where you don't want to be. But like, what if? What if you have that conversation? You never know. You can feel the fear. Like, I don't want to talk to my team member. I don't want to talk to my client because I might, seem weak, or I might lose their trust. But there are ways that you can have those conversations without feeling like that.
Absolutely. And I think too many people can relate to this, or at least they hope they can, because when we initially started the podcast, it was more of a passion project. But then as we got more comfortable, we wanted to grow and we started adding all these seemingly small additions to the things that we were doing. Oh, we're going to have on guests. Okay, well, now that we have on guests, we can amplify our marketing. And so we want to monetize the podcast. And then we wanted to have like that soft skills development membership or community that we had. And those things at the time sounded small. I'm like, yeah, we can totally do that. So we kept saying yes because we want to be helpful to this community that we are creating. And each individual request or add on that we would brainstorm seemed reasonable. But when we stopped, or I had to stop, and realize that all of these things were accumulating to significantly more than I had the capacity to handle, because I don't just have this podcast. I have my own business. I have a husband. I have at any given point up to 5 children running in and out of my household. Then that doesn't include their extracurricular activities. It doesn't include me taking space for my own like well-being and self-care. So doing all that work, it was like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember a couple years ago, I had people ask me to help them and their community. I had help people asking me to help like in their networking. I was doing collaboration with somebody working on a thing locally for business women. And I felt like I was saying yes to everything because I wanted to take on all these opportunities. And at one point, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm like, I literally cannot keep saying yes. And we have to figure out what boundaries that we can set for ourselves. Because, of course, as leaders, as business owners, whatever you're doing in life, you want to take on opportunities. Then you start to realize, I literally have no time for me, my family. Like, just as you were talking about too, Dana, like, there's so many things that we want to do, but we have to set those boundaries. And yes, we can experiment. We can say, hey, we can do this and do this. But then all of a sudden, if it starts to become overwhelming, with that being said, I had to tell everything that I said yes to, I had to like back up. I'm like, I can't do this. It's not aligning with my needs right now. My capacity is full. Yes, there were, oh, that sucks that you're leaving, but I got to look out for me. As selfish as that sounds, like, yes, like you should do that. But again, have conversations and figure out those boundaries and set them and stand by them.
I think all of those things, like even with ourselves. So I think we started this podcast episode with difficult conversations with our team or with our clients, but it could also be with our business partners or honestly with ourselves. And so we make these excuses of, I don't want to let this networking president down, or I don't want to let my podcast co-host down, or we're just a classic avoidance overthinking. Meanwhile, I don't know. And then this is not me trying to put words in your mouth, but maybe you're on your end, like internal, like, why is everything being delayed? Why is she not doing this? Why is she not doing that? Client deliverables or podcast details are late. Like, we're behind schedule. The problems are going to multiply because we essentially are making assumptions about how someone else is feeling or going to react. But we finally have to have a conversation, whether it's on performance of is everything in our podcast going. I think because we have that conversation, we now have a game plan, and we do meet every week. It's on the calendar where we have the check-ins. For those that are listening, shout out to the L10 meeting and EOS system. It's doing great. But I was able to take the emotion out of it and be like, this didn't happen because of XYZ. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. And then, more or less, you now are an accountability partner, and I don't feel afraid to ask for help because we have this weekly check-in that we're not waiting 3 months for a problem to explode. We check in earlier so that we can find solutions together as a team instead of letting them build up and essentially punishing ourselves or myself for not having the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, those meetings, I love them. We have fun in them. And although like we're talking about like the growth of our show and the growth within ourselves and the wins and what's missing versus what's not missing. And this actually helps with client meetings too, because you can take the specifics of each client that you have and meet with them weekly, bi-weekly, and go over what's going on within the team, what tasks need to be delegated, what's missing. Because I've seen this happen too, where there are no meetings and everything is relayed and are communicated through Slack. And you know how Slack is, like you type in something and then like other people start chiming in and things get lost and nothing is delegated out the way that it's supposed to. And then everybody starts to get frustrated. And then the owner, your client is starting to get frustrated because things are not done in time. It's like, well, things are getting missed. But if you start having those conversations early enough and having consistent check-ins with your clients and teams, those difficult conversations are less and less. Unless something happens that's, there are things sometimes that are out of your control and you have to have another difficult conversation. But having those check-ins to make sure everything is running smoothly can avoid conflict.
I think there's some patterns between both of our things, our experiences, that hopefully we can help identify for everyone. The first thing is that we need to stop convincing ourselves that avoiding difficult conversations is a kind thing to do, because in the long run, it's actually a cruel thing to do to everyone involved.
I mean, you can still be nice and not.
So when we think about it, like, the reality is, yes, we can have conversations in a kind manner, but avoiding it is the issue. When we avoid addressing problems, those problems don't just disappear. They like grow, and they're going to fester, and they're going to get bigger and more complicated because they're going to start stacking up on top of each other with other issues that may not even be a big deal. Meanwhile, the other person has no idea there's even an issue to solve.
Right. So people can't fix problems they don't know exist. We have this fantasy that problems will just resolve themselves without communication. Just like if you were to talk to your spouse and if something is bothering you, if you don't say something's bothering you, then your spouse is not going to know. And then you're going to get upset and it's just going to trickle down. Like, just bring it up. And for those of us who consider ourselves nice people, because I think I'm nice, and I think, a lot of our listeners probably will fall into that category too, is that we do struggle to have difficult conversations because we think conflict will damage relationships.
But I think there is such a difference between early conversations and delayed conversations. And to save the relationship or to keep the relationship steady, like the other person is probably assuming it is, the earlier these conversations we have, that's a collaborative problem solving. And so I know I mentioned earlier about our weekly meeting and like the L10. One of those pieces of the L10 is called the IDS, and identify, discuss, solve, solution, something. And so that's why if you wait, you almost will forget some of the details of why it became a problem in the first place. So taking a moment to have an early conversation when it first like hits, not being reactive, but try to be proactive with, all right, identify the problem. Maybe you got offended, but why did you get offended? What happened? Identify that root thing. Then if it's not like emergent in your weekly meeting, discuss it, go through it, and do your best to like leave emotions out of it so you don't damage the relationship. And then together you can collaborate and solve it. And this, honestly, from personal experience, will help reduce, if not completely avoid, physical and emotional stress by avoiding these conversations. Like the amount of mental energy it takes to try to push through something that is clearly burning you out is a lot. And you start to dread the very thing that you were passionate about in the first place.
That energy that sucks the life out of you when you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm so emotional. But yes, taking the emotional, it's taken me some time in my personal life specifically to, to try to say what I needed to say without feeling like my energy is being taken away. And then, that feeling when you're dreading checking your email because you might see a message from that person, from your team member, from your client, or you're laying awake at night rehearsing conversations you're not even planning to have. That's another mental energy. If you are laying awake at night when you're supposed to be relaxing and you're rehearsing all these conversations, what if this? What if that? They might say this. That is exhausting because if you're not going to have the conversation, just don't have it stick in your head like that. Or when we start complaining to other people about the situation instead of talking to the person that it actually involves.
I feel like that's a huge red flag. Like
Yes.
something that needs to be, I feel like should be distinguished is like, if you're venting to everyone except the person who can actually help solve the problem, one, it's clear that you're avoiding a necessary conversation, but that's going to affect team dynamics. And there is definitely a
Mm-hmm.
difference between conflict and conversation. And I was talking about this earlier this week. I think it's a generational thing. So millennials don't come at me, but I am a millennial. And I think too often, like too many of us were raised to essentially assume a difficult conversation is a conflict, when in reality, it's just an uncomfortable conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we wait too long to have them. So then it does become a conflict. And if something awkward or uncomfortable happens, we were sent, or like had big emotions, we weren't taught how to fix them. We weren't taught how to navigate them in a healthy way. We were sent to our rooms or we were punished for having big emotions. So that's why I feel like, big asterisk right there, I feel like this is why we as adults, whether in the professional setting or in personal setting, we avoid these conversations because we've never been taught how to have them in the first place. So we see it as conflict and we just kind of sweep it under the rug and never touch it again until it bubbles up again and like it's the elephant in the room. Whereas if we take a moment to get practical and think, how can we actually have this conversation before it becomes a real problem? You got to catch it when it's small. And like, I'm a person, I got to talk about it. I need to work through things externally. So, like, I need to talk through it, even if it doesn't make sense. That if you're the type of person that needs to like internally work through it before you do talk about it, box it up, put it on a shelf and say, I can come back to this when I'm ready, but you have to come back to it. So, being pretty direct is probably the first thing, like catching it when it's small and being direct of, okay, this is what it is. I don't have the time right now because maybe I'm in the car line and I'm going here, there, and everywhere else, or I have project deadlines with the client. I'm going to put this here and we're going to table it until our meeting on whatever day it is.
For me personally, I've started to, let's say that today something's bothering me. I would, instead of right then and there saying something, I'd take a little bit, an hour, half of the day to process how I feel so the emotions don't come out. So, personally, on a personal level, I'm very emotional, especially talking to people that I care about, and I cry. But I've been trying to work on this for myself to where I need to get out what I need to say and I don't want to cry. So I take a little bit and have to process my emotions by myself so that I can come and actually have a conversation with you and making sure that I make sense and the words come out right, you know? So, and everybody's going to have their own way of processing their emotions, but just word vomit, just get it out, just say like, hey, this is how I'm feeling.
That was your personal. Mine is like I do start with curiosity and not accusations because nothing fires me up more than someone making like an accusation towards me. And so I, being the glass half full type of person, I assume good intent or maybe just complete no idea, oblivious until I learn otherwise. So instead of saying, you always do XYZ, you're always behind, or you're always this, I am very intentional in saying, here's what I'm noticing. I'm taking responsibility and accountability
Mhm.
for the situation. Here's what I'm noticing. Here's what I'm feeling. And I'm curious about your perspective, or help me understand your way of doing things. And then collaborate on solutions or finding common ground so that we're solving it together. That is how I do it. I know it kind of gets on some people's nerves because I am very glass half full, but to me, it always, I mean, even if it's awkward and uncomfortable, it comes across better or is received better than if I just come out firing it on all cylinders. You messed up and you did this. We just, no, not gonna do it.
No, that's a great way, I believe too. So there's two methods that we want to talk about when it comes to conflict resolution and having difficult conversations. There's name it early and relationship preserving approach. So first, name it early, which means as soon as you notice a pattern, not after it's happened 5 or 10 times, you want to address it. Second, assume good intent. You approach the conversation from a place of curiosity, not blame. Third, you want to focus on impact. You talk about the specific consequences, not personality traits. So if something is happening that is not the way it should be, what is that consequence? And fourth, collaborate on solutions. You ask, how can we handle this differently? Not, you need to stop doing this.
And I like that one because that's kind of the approach that I do. I don't think I ever focus on impact. So that will be the tweak that I take away. Um, but the other approach that you were talking about, relationship preserving approach, is obviously a bit more relationship focused, especially for client situations where we're trying to maintain that no like trust factor. So to start off with that one, you're going to set the context. You're going to let them know, I want to talk about something because I value our relationship. This immediately is going to frame it as a collaborative conversation and not adversarial. Adversarial. Then you share observations. I've noticed this specific behavior or pattern. Don't have any judgments, just facts. 'Cause I'm a fact finder. Then you explain the impact. The effect is the specific consequences. So, to give a real world example, I've noticed that we have not been receiving the B roll videos by the due date. The effect is we're not able to create the reels that we had mapped out on time. So they're going late, or we're having to rush to make sure that they're done on time and scheduled. And then finally, you're going to invite solutions. So, what is your perspective as the professional in this situation? How should we handle this going forward? What do you need, or how can you make sure that the deliverables are received on time? And then kind of just go from there. Let the conversation flow.
Yes, diving deep into those perspectives and diving deep into the solutions. Because again, going back to saying, this is late, this is done wrong. Okay, well, cool. Like, I know from being a team member from that perspective, I don't want to feel like I'm being attacked. Okay, like let's have these conversations. Like, what can we do to make this better? Curiosity, approach with genuine interest and understanding. Assumption of good intent.
Okay. I think these two are great frameworks. And I think it would be a helpful exercise to have like brainstorm actual conversation starters. And this is something that you can do with your spouse. This is something you can do with your team if you have one. If you're in a co-working space, like grab someone that you trust and like really come up with but some phrases that like we've already mentioned before and we have used for ourselves is, I want to check in about something that I've been noticing, or can we talk about how to handle this situation going forward? I value our relationship, so I want to address it before it becomes a bigger issue. Other ones could be, I'm sensing some disconnect around XYZ issue, and I would love for us to get on the same page. Help me understand your perspective. These are all just examples of great starters to position a difficult conversation as collaborative and not a confrontational conflict.
Exactly. And people should know the red flags that indicate they're avoiding necessary conversations. If you feel resentful or frustrated with someone regularly, if you're complaining to other people about the issue instead of the person involved, if you're making excuses for someone else's behavior that's affecting others, if problems keep reoccurring without being addressed, or if you still feel stressed about upcoming interactions with specific people, these are the signs that there's a conversation you need to have.
Absolutely. So, for those that have stuck it out with us this long, here is our unsolicited advice, but something that I think we both completely stand behind is the conversation that you're avoiding is usually 80% easier than you think it's going to be. Because most people want to do good work and maintain good relationships, where they're not just sitting around plotting ways to make your life difficult. I mean, I know there are some of those people, but majority of us are not like that. They just need to know there's a problem to solve. And when you approach it again collaboratively, they're usually relieved to finally understand what's been going on. Like in the case of us, I know I boohooed for like 20 minutes. But there was no hesitation. It was very supportive. It was, all right, we're making changes. And it was almost immediately like on a dime. All right, we're done having guests on. And then we took a week for me to process and like be okay. But then the next week, we started our weekly meetings and we came up with a game plan of what we want this podcast to look like, the direction that we're doing. We created a more solid foundation. And then we undercomplicated a lot of things, if that's even a word, because reality, most of these conversations are just fine. They're not life. I mean, in this case, it was life changing, but it wasn't relationship ending. It's just a normal human communication about how to work together better so that we both essentially are getting what we want and need out of this partnership.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how most conversations are. We are so into our head, like, well, this person's not going to like what I say. But listen, do you understand the relationship that you have with that person? I can see it happening with somebody you probably just met or somebody that just got hired on your team and you're having a problem. But if you're in a business relationship with somebody for so long, you're, married to your spouse for so long, having difficult conversations, to me at least, is a lot easier. But another thing too, like if you're having difficult conversations with people that you don't know, maybe it is easier because you don't have a relationship. So that's something to ponder on too.
That right.
Yeah, right. Time doesn't make difficult conversations easier. It makes them more loaded with resentment. So have the conversation this week, not next month, because you're going to build up these thoughts that are pretty much made up. because you have not had that conversation yet. You don't know what's going to happen. So instead of waiting and waiting, just rip off the Band-Aid and have the conversation.
So before we wrap up, if you have a client situation or a partnership that has been bothering you, but you're not sure how to address it, use one of the scripts that we mentioned in this episode and begin having that conversation. Like, this is exact language to use for those tricky situations. They're ones that we have literally used for ourselves, between me and my husband, between me and clients. They will work. You just have to use them.
And if you're managing team dynamics and avoiding necessary performance conversations or just a difficult conversation, I think we should have a conversation. You can email us with questions that you may have that will be in the show notes.
So just to recap, here's our challenge for you today. Difficult conversations are only difficult when you wait too long to have them. So identify one small issue, even if it doesn't seem like it's worth talking about. If you've noticed it and you're avoiding it, this is the time to address it before it grows. And again, don't aim for a perfect conversation. Just have a conversation about it, whatever it is.
Yes, exactly. We thank you all for tuning in today. Again, all of our information is going to be in the show notes. Until next time.
Thanks for spending time with us today. If something in this episode gave you a fresh perspective, share it with a friend or send us a DM. We love hearing how these conversations land with you.
And if you're curious about how soft skills can support your next season of growth, we each have more resources to share.
You can find Dana on Instagram at danas.desk.nc for Pinterest strategy and intentional marketing.
And Sarah at URembert for team development, business leadership, and podcast support.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose
and growing with intention.